There's something deeply personal about your face. It's the part of you that's most uniquely identifiable, most intimately connected to your sense of self, most vulnerable to judgment. And in the age of social media, where showing your face has become almost mandatory, where selfies are currency and facial recognition is everywhere, there exists a quiet resistance. Some people simply don't like showing their face online. They'll share other things, ideas, thoughts, even aspects of their lives. But when it comes to their face, something inside them says no. This isn't about being photogenic or not. It's something deeper, more psychological, more profound. They feel an instinctive reluctance, a protective impulse, a sense that showing their face would expose something essential and vulnerable. So what are the hidden psychological reasons some people don't like showing their face online? What are they protecting? What do they understand about faces, identity, and vulnerability that others might have missed? And what can Carl Jung, the pioneering psychologist who spent his life exploring the depths of human identity, teach us about why the face is so psychologically significant and why some people choose to keep theirs private? To understand this, we need to start with what Jung understood about the face as the primary site of identity and recognition. Your face is unlike any other part of your body. It's where your identity lives most visibly. When people think of you, they see your face. When they recognize you, it's your face they're recognizing. Your face carries your expressions, reveals your emotions, shows your age, displays your unique combination of features that make you specifically you. In Jungian terms, the face is where the ego meets the world, where your subjective sense of I becomes an object for others to perceive. When you show your face, you're not just sharing an image, you're making your very identity available for observation, judgment, and definition by others. This is a profound act of vulnerability that some people instinctively resist. People who don't like showing their face online have often recognized, consciously or unconsciously, that the face is too central to identity to be casually shared. They understand that once your face is out there, you become recognizable, categorizable, definable in ways that you can't control. They're protecting their identity from being fixed, frozen, and defined by others' perceptions. There's also something crucial happening with what Jung called the persona and the face as its primary vehicle. Remember, the persona is the social mask we wear to navigate public life. But here's what's interesting. The face itself is both literal and metaphorical mask. Your facial expressions are how you present yourself to others, how you manage what others see of your inner state. When you show your face online, especially in photos where your expression is frozen in time, you're creating a permanent record of your persona, a fixed image of your social mask that will be viewed and judged repeatedly. For some people, this permanence feels uncomfortable or even dangerous. They're aware that any facial expression they show will be interpreted, that people will make judgments about their personality, their mood, their character based on how they look in a frozen moment. And they're not comfortable with that level of interpretation being applied to a static image that can't respond, can't clarify, can't adjust based on context. People who don't like showing their face often have a sophisticated understanding of how much judgment happens based on facial appearance and expression, and they're choosing not to subject themselves to that judgment. Jung would recognize this as psychological wisdom, understanding the power of the face to create impressions and choosing to control that power by withholding the image. Let's also consider what Jung understood about psychological boundaries and the face as boundary. Your face is literally the front of you, the boundary between your inner world and the outer world. It's where inside meets outside, where private meets public. When you show your face, you're making that boundary visible and accessible to others. For people with what Jung might call sensitive boundary systems, this feels like a violation. They experience showing their face as opening their psychological boundary to intrusion, allowing others visual access to the threshold of their inner world. People who don't like showing their face online often have an acute sense of psychological boundaries. They understand intuitively that the face is a boundary that should be protected, that not everyone deserves visual access to this intimate threshold. By keeping their face private, they're maintaining control over who gets to see this boundary, who gets to stand at the threshold of their inner world. This isn't paranoia or excessive privacy. It's appropriate boundary maintenance, based on understanding that the face is psychologically significant as the meeting point between self and world. There's also something profound about what Jung called the self and its relationship to the face. Jung distinguished between the ego, your conscious sense of identity, and the self, the deep center of your total being that includes both conscious and unconscious. Here's the paradox. Your face is supposed to represent you, to be the visible sign of your identity. But for people connected to their deeper self, the face feels inadequate, even deceptive. They know that their face, however it looks, can't possibly represent the totality of who they are. It shows only surface, only appearance, only the most external aspect of their being. When someone deeply connected to their self considers showing their face online, they may experience a kind of existential resistance. They don't want to be reduced to their appearance. They don't want people to think they know them based on seeing their face. They understand that the face, while intimately connected to identity, is also profoundly misleading, suggesting a kind of knowledge of the person that visual appearance can't actually provide. People who don't like showing their face are often protecting themselves from this reductionism, from being known only as their appearance rather than as the complex, multidimensional beings they actually are. Jung also spoke about what he called the shadow and its particular relationship to facial appearance. The shadow contains everything about ourselves we're ashamed of or don't want to acknowledge. And for many people, aspects of their physical appearance, including their face, have become shadow material. Perhaps they were teased about their features as children. Perhaps they've internalized cultural beauty standards that their face doesn't meet. Perhaps they simply feel that their face doesn't match their internal sense of who they are. When these people consider showing their face online, they're confronting shadow material, the parts of themselves they're uncomfortable with. The face becomes a site of shame or inadequacy, and showing it feels like exposing the shadow for everyone to see and judge. People who don't like showing their face often carry shame or discomfort about their appearance that they're protecting by keeping their face private. This isn't vanity or superficiality, it's shadow management, choosing not to expose vulnerable parts of themselves to public scrutiny until they've done the internal work of integrating that shadow material. Jung would approach this with compassion, understanding that shadow integration is difficult work that requires safety and privacy, not forced exposure. There's also something crucial about what Jung understood regarding introversion and the face as extroverted expression. Jung defined introversion as orientation toward the inner subjective world rather than the outer objective world. For deep introverts, their identity exists primarily in their inner experience, in their thoughts, feelings, and reflections, not in their external appearance. The face, by its nature, is extroverted. It's the outward-facing part of you, designed for social interaction and external communication. When an introvert is asked to share their face online, there's a fundamental mismatch between what's being requested and where their identity actually lives. They're being asked to represent themselves through the most extroverted part of their being when their actual self exists in introverted depths that have nothing to do with facial appearance. People who don't like showing their face are often introverts who understand this mismatch. They know that their face doesn't represent who they really are, because who they really are exists in invisible internal spaces. Showing their face feels like misrepresentation, like offering something external and superficial when their actual identity is internal and deep. Jung would validate this experience, recognizing that for introverts, the face genuinely is an inadequate representation of self. There's also something significant about what Jung called psychological energy and the cost of facial visibility. When your face is online, you become recognizable. This recognition has energetic costs. You might be recognized in public. People might approach you based on your online presence. You become visible in ways that create ongoing social obligations and energetic exchanges. For people who carefully manage their psychic energy, particularly introverts and highly sensitive people, this cost is too high. They understand that facial visibility creates energetic demands that they're not willing or able to meet. People who don't like showing their face often have an intuitive understanding of these energetic implications. They're protecting their energy by remaining visually anonymous, maintaining the freedom to move through the world without being recognized, without carrying the energetic weight of public recognition. This isn't antisocial behavior. It's intelligent energy management, understanding that recognition costs energy and choosing to conserve that energy by keeping their face private. Let's also consider what Jung understood about projection and the face as projection screen. Jung discovered that people constantly project their own unconscious material onto others, and the face is one of the primary surfaces onto which we project. When you look at someone's face, you're not seeing them objectively. You're seeing your own psychological content reflected back. You might project attractiveness, threat, trustworthiness, or countless other qualities based not on what's actually there, but on your own unconscious associations. When someone shows their face online, they become a screen for thousands of projections. Some people will find them attractive, others unattractive. Some will trust them based on their face, others will feel instinctive distrust, and none of these reactions have much to do with who the person actually is. People who don't like showing their face often understand this projection dynamic and want no part of it. They don't want to become material for others' unconscious processes. They don't want to be judged, categorized, and responded to based on projections that have nothing to do with their actual character or identity. By keeping their face private, they're refusing to serve as projection screens for the collective. Jung would see this as psychologically sophisticated, understanding how projection works and choosing not to participate in dynamics that would lead to being fundamentally misperceived. There's also something profound about what Jung called the complex and how facial features can become complexed. A complex is a cluster of emotionally charged psychological material that can essentially take over consciousness. Many people have complexes around their appearance, and particular facial features often sit at the center of these complexes. Perhaps a nose they were teased about. Perhaps eyes that don't match cultural ideals. Perhaps features that remind them of a disliked parent. Perhaps a face that doesn't align with their gender identity. When someone with appearance complexes considers showing their face, the complex gets activated. They're flooded with painful emotions, shame, anxiety, self-hatred. The face isn't just a face anymore. It's a trigger for deeply painful psychological material. People who don't like showing their face often have complexes around appearance that make facial visibility genuinely traumatic. They're not being vain or superficial. They're protecting themselves from activating painful complexes that would cause genuine psychological distress. Jung would approach this with deep compassion, understanding that complexes are wounds that deserve gentle healing, not forced exposure that would only deepen the trauma. Jung also understood something about authenticity and the face's potential for inauthenticity. In everyday life, your face is dynamic, constantly changing expression, responding to context, communicating in real time. But in photos, your face is frozen, static, often posed or filtered to look a certain way. This static image is fundamentally inauthentic compared to your actual living face. When someone who values authenticity considers showing their face in static photos online, they may experience resistance based on this inauthenticity. They know that any photo will be a distorted, frozen version of their actual face, and they're not comfortable with that distortion representing them. People who don't like showing their face often have a strong commitment to authenticity that makes posed, filtered, static facial images feel fundamentally false. They'd rather show nothing than show something inauthentic. This isn't perfectionism, it's integrity, refusing to misrepresent yourself even in small ways. There's also something crucial about what Jung called the relationship between inner and outer, and how the face represents this relationship. Your face is where your inner emotional and psychological state becomes visible to others. You might be feeling sad, and it shows in your face. You might be anxious, and others can see it. This transparency can feel dangerous, especially for people who need to maintain some privacy about their inner state. When you show your face online in photos, you're essentially creating a permanent record of your inner state at that moment, visible to anyone at any time. People who don't like showing their face often want to maintain more control over when and to whom their inner state is visible. They don't want a frozen moment of vulnerability, sadness, or anxiety available for public viewing forever. By keeping their face private, they're protecting their right to have inner experiences that remain inner, that don't automatically become visible to others. Jung would understand this as appropriate boundary maintenance around the inner-outer relationship. Let's also consider what Jung understood about the collective gaze and its power. Jung recognized that being looked at by many people simultaneously creates a particular psychological experience, a kind of collective pressure that can be overwhelming. When your face is online, you're subject to the collective gaze, potentially thousands of people looking at you, judging you, forming opinions about you. For some people, this collective gaze feels oppressive, violating, almost physically uncomfortable. They can imagine or even sense all those eyes on their face, and it creates genuine anxiety and distress. People who don't like showing their face online are often highly sensitive to the collective gaze. They feel its weight, its judgment, its power more acutely than others. This isn't paranoia, it's sensitivity to a real phenomenon. Collective attention does have power, and that power can be uncomfortable or even harmful for sensitive individuals. By keeping their face private, they're protecting themselves from this oppressive collective gaze, maintaining their right to exist without being subjected to mass observation. Jung would recognize this as healthy self-protection against collective forces that can overwhelm individual consciousness. There's also something profound about what Jung called individuation, and the face's role in either supporting or undermining it. Individuation is the process of becoming your authentic, unique self, rather than conforming to collective expectations. But facial appearance is one of the primary ways the collective categorizes and judges you. Based on your face, people make instant assessments about your race, gender, age, attractiveness, trustworthiness, all categories that pull you into collective definitions rather than honoring your unique individuality. When someone committed to individuation considers showing their face online, they may resist because they understand that facial visibility invites categorization that works against individuation. They don't want to be defined by how they look. They want to be known for who they are, beyond appearance, for their thoughts, their character, their unique essence that has nothing to do with their facial features. People who don't like showing their face are often protecting their individuation process from the categorizing, defining, collective gaze that reduces individuals to types based on appearance. Jung would see this protection as wise, understanding that individuation requires sometimes resisting the collective's tendency to define you according to external characteristics. Let's also consider what Jung understood about the anima and animus, the inner contrasexual images we all carry, and their relationship to facial self-image. Jung believed that men carry an inner feminine image, the anima, and women carry an inner masculine image, the animus. These inner images profoundly affect how we experience our own appearance. When you look at your face, you're not just seeing your features objectively. You're comparing your actual face to the idealized inner image you carry, and for many people, this comparison is painful. Their actual face never quite measures up to the ideal face they imagine. When someone with a painful gap between actual and ideal appearance considers showing their face online, they're confronting this gap publicly. They're exposing the distance between who they imagine they should look like and who they actually are. People who don't like showing their face often carry difficult relationships with their anima or animus, complicated by cultural beauty standards that make the gap between actual and ideal even more painful. They're protecting themselves from the shame of this gap being visible to others. Jung would understand this as a natural response to archetypal tension and would work toward integrating the actual self rather than forcing exposure before that integration is achieved. There's also something significant about what Jung called the inferior function and its relationship to self-presentation. For people whose inferior function involves extroverted sensation or feeling, dealing with physical appearance and its social impact is inherently difficult. They don't naturally understand how they appear to others. They don't intuitively grasp the social implications of their appearance. This makes showing their face feel like exposing their area of greatest incompetence and vulnerability. People who don't like showing their face often have inferior functions related to external presentation or social appearance. They're working from their weakest psychological function when they try to think about how their face will be perceived, which naturally creates anxiety and resistance. Jung would say this isn't something to overcome by forcing yourself to develop your inferior function. It's something to honor by accepting your natural strengths lie elsewhere and by not forcing yourself to operate constantly from your position of greatest weakness. Jung also spoke about what he called the numinous, experiences of the sacred, and how certain things should be protected from profanation. For some people, their face has numinous quality. It's not just a collection of features. It's the unique, unrepeatable expression of their individual essence, something almost sacred in its singularity. To show this sacred thing casually online, to allow it to be scrolled past, judged quickly, forgotten easily, feels like profanation. People who don't like showing their face may be protecting its numinous quality. They sense that their face is too precious, too sacred, too uniquely theirs to be casually consumed as content. This isn't vanity, it's reverence, treating your own unique physical manifestation as something sacred that deserves protection from casual, profane viewing. Jung would deeply respect this attitude, recognizing it as spiritual sensitivity that understands the difference between sacred and profane. There's also something crucial about what Jung called psychological digestion and the face's role in self-understanding. Jung believed that we need time to process and integrate our experiences, including our experience of our own appearance. Your relationship with your own face changes over time as you age, as you come to terms with your features, as you integrate your appearance into your self-concept. This is delicate psychological work that requires privacy. When you show your face online, before you've fully integrated your relationship with your own appearance, you're inviting external input that interferes with internal processing. Other people's reactions can interrupt your own digestion process, imposing their interpretations before you've formed your own. People who don't like showing their face are often still processing their relationship with their own appearance. They need private space to come to terms with how they look without interference from others' projections and judgments. By keeping their face private, they're protecting this integration process, giving themselves time to digest their own appearance before exposing it to external interpretation. Let's also consider what Jung understood about control and the face's uncontrollability. Jung recognized that some aspects of life can be controlled while others must be accepted. Your face is largely beyond your control. You didn't choose your features. You can't fundamentally change your bone structure. Short of surgery, your face is what it is, a given rather than a choice. For people who struggle with this lack of control, showing their face feels like displaying their powerlessness, exhibiting something they couldn't choose and can't fully control. People who don't like showing their face may be struggling with accepting this uncontrollable aspect of themselves. They're not comfortable displaying something they have so little control over, something that was given rather than chosen. By keeping their face private, they're maintaining some control over who sees this uncontrollable part of themselves. Jung would work with this as an acceptance issue, helping the person come to terms with their face as a given, but would never force premature exposure before that acceptance is achieved. There's also something profound about what Jung called the relationship between body and psyche, and how the face embodies this relationship. Jung understood that body and psyche are interconnected. That physical form affects psychological experience, and vice versa. Your face is where this body-psyche relationship is most visible to others. When people look at your face, they're not just seeing physical features, they're reading psychological states, making inferences about your character, your emotions, your very soul, based on your physical appearance. This conflation of physical and psychological can feel invasive and reductive. When someone shows their face online, they're allowing others to make psychological judgments based on physical appearance, to read their soul through their features, to assume psychological qualities based on how they look. People who don't like showing their face often resist this conflation. They understand that their physical features don't reflect their psychological reality, that their face might suggest personality traits they don't have or hide qualities they do possess. By keeping their face private, they're refusing to allow this reductive reading of psyche through body. Jung would appreciate this resistance, understanding that the relationship between physical appearance and psychological reality is complex and often misleading. Let's also consider what Jung understood about vulnerability and its gradations. Jung recognized that different people have different vulnerabilities, and that exposure should be calibrated to what each person can tolerate. For some people, showing their face is genuinely one of their greatest vulnerabilities. It's not that they can't show anything personal. They might be comfortable sharing thoughts, feelings, experiences, but the face specifically touches their deepest vulnerability in ways other exposures don't. People who don't like showing their face are identifying the face as a specific vulnerability that exceeds their tolerance for exposure. This isn't weakness. It's accurate self-knowledge, understanding what you can and cannot handle exposing. Jung would honor this self-knowledge, never insisting that someone expose their greatest vulnerability just because others find that particular exposure easy. There's also something significant about what Jung called the relationship with the mother and father archetypes and how they affect facial self-image. Your first experience of faces was your parents' faces. Your relationship with your own face is inevitably influenced by your relationship with their faces and their reactions to yours. If you were criticized for your appearance, if love was conditional on looking a certain way, If your parents projected their own appearance issues onto you, you carry wounds around your face. When someone with these wounds considers showing their face online, they're touching deeply painful early material about worthiness, acceptability, and conditional love. People who don't like showing their face often carry parental wounds around appearance that make facial visibility genuinely traumatic. They're not just worried about strangers' judgments, they're re-experiencing early wounds about being judged by the most important people in their lives. By keeping their face private, they're protecting themselves from re-traumatization. Jung would work therapeutically with these parental wounds, but would never suggest forcing exposure that would reopen unhealed trauma. Jung also spoke about what he called the compensatory nature of symptoms, and how resistance to showing your face might be compensating for something else. Perhaps you're compensating for a culture that overvalues appearance by refusing to participate in appearance-based evaluation. Perhaps you're compensating for earlier periods when you were too visible and it was harmful. Perhaps you're compensating for parts of yourself that are overexposed by keeping your face protected. People who don't like showing their face may be engaging in this compensatory function, balancing something one-sided in their lives or in the culture. Their resistance isn't just personal preference, it's psychological wisdom, creating balance where there was imbalance. Jung would explore what's being compensated rather than simply trying to eliminate the symptom. There's also something profound about what Jung called the eternal versus the temporal and how the face represents this tension. Your face changes constantly, aging, expressing different emotions, appearing different in different lights and moods. But photos freeze your face in time, creating a permanent record of a temporary state. This freezing can feel wrong to people who understand that they're constantly changing, constantly in process, never fixed or final. When someone who understands their own fluidity considers showing their face in static photos online, they may resist because it contradicts their experience of themselves as process rather than product. People who don't like showing their face often have a strong sense of themselves as becoming rather than being, as fluid rather than fixed. Static facial images violate this understanding, suggesting a permanence that doesn't match their lived experience of constant change and evolution. Jung would appreciate this resistance as philosophical sophistication, understanding that human beings are processes, not objects, and that static images lie about this fundamental reality. Let's also consider what Jung understood about death and its relationship to images. Jung spoke often about mortality and its psychological significance. There's something death-like about photographs, freezing a living, changing face into a static, unchanging image. The photograph separates your face from your living, breathing presence, creating a kind of death mask that will outlive the moment it captured and possibly outlive you. For people aware of mortality, this death-like quality of photographs can feel disturbing. Showing your face in photos means creating these death masks of yourself. Permanent frozen images that will exist after the living moment has passed, after your face has changed, possibly after you've died. People who don't like showing their face may be responding to this death-like quality of static images. They don't want to create frozen versions of themselves that will outlive the living moment. They want to remain alive, changing, present, not fixed in death-like permanence. Jung would understand this as existential sensitivity, awareness of mortality that makes the freezing of living faces into static images feel psychologically uncomfortable. Finally, there's something to be said about what Jung called individuation and the ultimate freedom it brings. Jung believed that true individuation brings freedom from collective pressures, including the pressure to be visible, to conform to social norms about sharing, to prove your existence through display. When someone deeply individuated considers showing their face online, they may simply feel no need or desire to do so. They're not resisting out of fear. They're simply uninterested in participating because they've transcended the need for external validation and visibility. People who don't like showing their face may have achieved or be moving toward this individuation-based freedom. They don't need to show their face because they've found more meaningful sources of identity, connection, and validation. Their lack of desire to display their face reveals not psychological limitation, but psychological freedom, liberation from the collective pressure to be visible. In the end, people who don't like showing their face online are protecting something essential about their identity, their boundaries, their psychological integrity. Carl Jung would recognize countless valid reasons for this protection. Sensitivity to collective gaze, awareness of projection, shadow material around appearance, introverted identity that doesn't live in the face, energetic costs of recognition, complex wounds around facial features, commitment to authenticity, resistance to categorization, protection of the sacred, incomplete integration of self-image, and ultimately, the wisdom to know what you can and cannot expose without harming yourself. Their reluctance isn't weakness, vanity, or irrationality. It's psychological intelligence, knowing that the face is profoundly significant, that its exposure carries real costs, and that choosing privacy over visibility is sometimes the most psychologically mature choice you can make. Jung would never pressure someone to show their face, understanding that each person must honor their own boundaries, their own vulnerabilities, their own path toward wholeness, which for some people means keeping the most identifiable part of themselves protected from the invasive, categorizing, projecting gaze of the digital collective.